Do you believe art can change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzzell. When I was a teenager, I spent a year in Geneva, Switzerland, learning French, along with other Americans, Australians, and Norwegian students. Travis, one of the Americans in the group, his mother was originally from Yugoslavia. One day he told us, "Hey, I'm going to go to Yugoslavia to meet some of my relatives there." I think all of the Americans let out a collective gasp. "How can you go there?" I remember saying. "It's a communist country." During the Cold War, I was really afraid of communist countries. Authoritarianism, secret police, no freedom of speech. I remember seeing him off at the train station and thinking, well, there goes Travis. I wonder if I'll ever see him again. Of course, I did see Travis again, who reported that he'd had a wonderful time meeting his mother's family. Obviously, I didn't know much about the former Yugoslavia, but any communist country meant the same thing to me. No freedom. Who would want to live in a place where an authoritarian government tried to suppress people's freedom, who released armed and dangerous forces to police their own citizens, who grabbed people off the street and threw them in detention, God knows where, with their families often not knowing where they were or what had happened to them? It's amazing how the tables can turn in just a few decades. Sometimes a book comes along at just the right time for me, a book that helps me make sense and process the fear and anger I'm feeling, leaving me with a sense of hope. A book that did that for me is ArtMill, a story of sustainable creativity in Bohemia, written by Barbara Benish, an artist and curator. In this book, Barbara shares her story of her curiosity about her Czech heritage, her travels in the former Czechoslovakia during the Cold War, and her connection and work with the community of artists living there at that time. It's a hopeful story for the times we're in, sharing how artists have resisted oppressive regimes and how they can rebuild and practice regenerative creativity once these regimes fall. This book was a healing remedy for me. I'm so glad to be able to talk to Barbara about it on today's episode. You want to know how you can really help me keep this show going? Follow me on your favorite listening app. So easy, right? And if you really want to give the show a boost, leave me a 5-star rating or review. Hi, Barbara. Thank you so much for being on Art Heals All Wounds today. I'm really excited to talk with you about your book.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Pam.
Oh, well, your book, ArtMill, and the subtitle of that is A Story of Sustainable Creativity in Bohemia. Your book landed at such a perfect time for me, the times we're in, the way I've been feeling, in a way that I think is even more powerful than if I'd read it 2 years ago.
Oh.
So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, just a brief idea of what this book is.
Thank you. Yes, it's also surprising for me that it's coming out now of all times in U.S. history. So it's a sort of a memoir. It talks about me leaving California as a young artist and moving to what was then Czechoslovakia. It talks about my integration with that culture, being an artist, working with artists in the underground before 1989, before the revolution, and then getting embedded in that culture there, becoming a mother, exhibiting over there after the changes in 89, and then setting up an art center in a very rural environment. So I moved from Southern California to not just, I moved from LA to Prague, but then to the complete Czech countryside, which was, I always say it's even more of a change than moving from LA to Prague. And then it talks about our organization I founded, a small NGO, and it talks about what happens in a post-totalitarian society for culture and how important that is for civil society. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yes.
And of course, when I started it 7 years ago, had no idea that the tables would be turned and that these would be the lessons for my home country.
Right. And I first want to talk a little bit about you growing up. You grew up in Southern California.
Mhm.
What were your thoughts, feelings about your Czechoslovakian heritage at that time?
So I talk about that, I think, in the first or second chapter, what that was like. My father's side, they were immigrants, and that was normal in the US, that we're all immigrants. I know that your last name is probably also a little Czech heritage. I don't know if you know that, but that's a Czech name.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, so yes, I talk about 1968 as a 10-year-old, what that was like to see the Soviet tanks roll in to Prague and for my family. So they had emigrated in the late 1800s, so it was a little bit removed, but we had still connections to the country and people, second generation in the US. So I didn't, like many immigrant families, we didn't speak the language anymore. My grandmother hid it from us because they wanted to adapt and to be integrated. So I relearned the language when I moved back there as a 30-year-old, when I finally moved back to Czech Republic. Yeah.
Right. But you went back there before you permanently, or you went there for the first time
Yeah.
before you permanently moved there. And for those of us
Mhm.
who grew up during the Cold War, countries behind the Iron Curtain just seemed like an impossible place to go. At least they did to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would have never thought, oh, I'm going to go visit
Right.
a country behind the Iron Curtain, but you
Yeah.
did. So I'm really curious about that decision, like how you had the courage to decide, oh, I'm going to go there. And also, were you worried a little bit about going there?
Well, it's a really good question, especially in the climate today in the US, because I also grew up with that big, scary Big Brother image of what Czechoslovakia was and the Soviet bloc countries and how evil it was. They were the enemies of the United States. But because I had that cultural heritage, I was super curious. I wanted to find family members. I was a little crazy, still am, but as an artist, I was curious, and I was in Europe anyway as a 21-year-old backpacking through. And I think it's really important to remember that that was a political situation that was imposed by governments to create fear so that we would never want to go there, and vice versa. The Soviets did the same. So there in Czech Republic today, there are still potato bugs that eat the potatoes that are called the American bug because they destroy the potato crops. So there were all these little things created that we would remain enemies, right? And I think that idea of the myths that are created and the propaganda that goes on both sides to keep us at war with each other or to keep us unfriendly, we need to really pay attention to that. So it's not like I was brave, or I was more like naive, I would say, and I was young, and it was scary. I'm not going to be paint a pretty picture. It was, I was stopped a lot, and crossing the border back then in the trains was not a fun thing. And especially because I would carry books and, music and things that they would confiscate. So it was not pretty, but I was very curious to learn about that part of my family. Yeah.
That is fascinating. If I remember correctly, you were already an artist.
Mhm.
I mean, not that you weren't an artist from the time you were born, but you already thought of yourself as an artist.
Mhm.
And I'm really curious what it was like to actually connect with other artists. Like, how did you even do that when
Yeah,
you
well,
when you arrived in Prague?
a lot of it was serendipity. I had very good luck. Some friends would give me, friends of friends would have somebody who had been there, and they gave me phone numbers. So I just kind of like did track people down and call them up. And, people were very reticent to even pick up the phone, of course, because everything was, followed and spied upon, and people would be tracked and have repercussions if they were dealing with somebody from the outside, from the West. So, as I learned about that whole kind of parallel structures and got to know, once I went there and was introduced to some of the artists, then I learned how to navigate that whole other underworld. Yeah. And so there's ways that you could get around it. And it's like the activists today in the US who are having such resistance, that there's a whole nother system that begins to develop kind of organically. But it's years of resistance across the world. So yeah, it was it opened up, and I was very lucky. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's some of the more humorous parts of your book were of the secret police and how easily they were picked out among the
Yeah. Yeah.
rest of the people and
Yeah.
following you, and it was and almost like there became a code that you would
Yeah.
speak just assuming that every venue was bugged.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. They were all, and I was followed because, I was an anomaly. There were virtually no Americans there then. And so I know now in retrospect that they were definitely had their eyes on me all the time, and especially the people who I was hanging out with and visiting, because the artists that I was fortunate enough to meet, and who are, my friends till today, they were working, they were dissidents. So, but doesn't mean that they were necessarily out in the streets protesting, like visibly, but the fact of the kind of work that they were making then was a reaction to the regime. So anyway, I've wandered from your question, sorry, but
Not at all, not at all. This is all so interesting to me because it's a action that I myself would have never even thought about taking. So
yeah, it was I write in the book that, I was having some success as an artist I just come out of grad school. I was actually still in grad school when we did this exchange with Czechoslovak and LA artists. And I was very frustrated with the market system, with the capitalization of art. I had been trained in installation art coming out of painting. So already feminist art and that whole history was pushing the boundaries of how art is viewed and made. So I was frustrated, even though, every artist, of course, wants to be supported, but in LA and in the 80s, it was boomtown for the arts for sure. But I was looking for alternatives. And I had read about what had happened, with the Prague Spring in 1968, that there was this opening up of this kind of socialist democracy. What would that mean? And these artists the artists that I got to meet, they were making art. It was such a rich production and sharing and community that kept the arts alive. And there was no market. So nobody could sell work there, first of
right.
all. And then there was maybe one gallery, and that was an official gallery. So how did the arts thrive? So I was really curious. So that's what kept me going back in the 80s.
Right. And you created this exchange called Art Dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
where it was some artists from LA and
Mm-hmm.
then Czech artists who were showing their work, exhibiting it together. And this, you write about like the challenge of even being able to put on a show of this nature.
Yeah, it was, because again, it was still the Cold War, so Americans, we were all the enemy, but things were loosening up. It was the end of the 80s already, so there were they were the brave people who agreed to do this, and it was, every day that yes, no, and as there was one more crack in the wall, we were able to kind of make this exchange happen. When we first proposed it with Stenka Gabulova, she was my co-curator there. I always said it's going to be an exchange, and they all laughed and they said, they had never left the country. Half of them didn't have passports at that point. And I said, we're going to start in Prague. We're going to bring our work there from LA, and then we're going to bring you guys to LA next year. And they all kind of went, yeah, you crazy lady. And then, of course, the world changed in November of 1989, and we were able to bring them, through a lot of very generous people and fundraising. We brought them to LA, and we showed them there too.
Right. So it did happen. And it's so interesting, all of the countries behind the Iron Curtain, when this curtain fell, it looked differently in different countries. And the former Czechoslovakia was really interesting because it's called the Velvet Revolution. And I'm hoping you can explain why it's called that, the significance of who the first president was of the new democracy. Like, what is different about that for the former Czechoslovakia?
Well, that's a very long, I'll try and give a short answer because it's a really deep question, but the former Czechoslovakia was a little bit better off than some of the other Soviet bloc countries at the time. Before the communist takeover, they were the third largest industrial country in Europe. Teeny tiny nation. Czechoslovakia was formed after World War I by President Masaryk. And his right-hand man was Edvard Benish. So they were able to create a new democracy after so many hundreds of years of the Habsburg regime. So they were coming out of, and they call it the First Republic. It was a very fruitful time, and economically it was super solid. And that carried over, I think, into what happened after 89. So they were able to adjust, I think, to a Western market, and that's a whole nother discussion about the economics of it, but they had a history already of a strong democracy. So coming out of 89, and they call it the Velvet Revolution, or some people won't even call it a revolution because it I have to be careful how I say this too, because it was possibly generated and deals were made so that people would not be killed, which is how it happens, right? But I would say they also call it the artist revolution because it was really from the ground up, and then the main dissident, Václav Havel, who became president, was a playwright. So here you have an artist and something of a philosopher who was just quoted at Davos. I don't know if you watched, by Prime Minister Carney, the famous essay, The Power and the Powerless. So he had kind of a structure that was able to propel this new democracy into the world that was already set up, because there was a moral code, there was a civil society. That was his whole thrust of the civil society. And talking about in that essay, which Carney so brilliantly brought up to this week, that if we don't participate in making democracy, it does go away. And so we have to take down our support in the little shop windows that's with the red star. And I remember them in Czechoslovakia. And at that point, people were taking down the signs in the store windows.
Right.
And that alone could put you in prison.
Right.
So it's like being confronted, and it's exactly what's happening in the US now with that everyday decision. And am I going to be part and parcel of this regime that's taking away all of our freedoms, or am I going to make a stand at some point? And that's what they did, and it came out of the students' unrest and the artists who were right there ready for a regime change.
Wow. Wow. I would say in the US right now, it's more, do I have the courage to keep up the signs, Black Lives Matter, the pride,
Yeah,
or the trans colors or
yeah,
flags, that's
yeah,
kind of where we are. Like,
yeah.
essentially there's been this decree that we cannot do that anymore. And I actually just got back from Seattle. And Seattle is just kind of so low key progressive. It's just like
Yeah,
we're not taking down our signs. We're putting
yeah,
up, it's
yeah,
interesting. And of
yeah,
course the Bay Area as well, but I
right.
feel very fortunate to be in places where
Yeah,
those signs of our values are not coming down. Um,
yeah, yeah. It's
but
very inspiring.
it
Mm.
is, it is. And I
Mhm.
want to skip ahead a little bit now.
Mhm.
I know that there are still a lot of things of you becoming an adult, but you moved to Prague
Mhm.
and you lived there for a while, but I want to talk about you buying this mill. Like, what was this mill? Can you say its name? I have it written down as the Red Mill, which is the translation, but what was its name?
In Czech, it's Červený Mlýn, red mill. Yeah,
Okay. What
Červen.
what was this mill? Where was this mill? Why did you buy this mill?
It's a long story, but basically, Prague was getting expensive, for I had two kids by now, two little babies, and there were some personal things which I hint about in the book that were not working and were getting very anxiety ridden. So I needed to leave Prague.
Mm,
And many artists were also leaving Prague just because of the increase in cost. And, as tourism rose after 89, it became kind of unaffordable for artists, which was really unfortunate. But the silver lining is that so I started looking, I had a tiny savings of $17,000, and I spent it all on this old ruin that I found with my then partner, the father of my children, and he's an architect. And we thought, this, even if we tear it down, it's a beautiful spot, and we'll see what happens if we can. So we camped there basically for the first few years and kind of renovated. And yeah, it was a big change into complete rural agricultural environment.
right. And of course, well, your whole book, I just have to tell you, feels like a fairy tale and not like the Disney fairy tale of the princesses, but more like some of the darker fairy tales where there's like this one book fairy tale that kept popping into my mind was The Wild Swans, which I don't know if you're familiar with that fairy tale.
No. Uh-uh.
It's a bit dark, but it is
Uh-huh.
of having an insurmountable task that
Yeah.
is actually accomplished in order to, well, to create freedom for some people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
And your whole book reminds me of that, but especially when we get to this mill, there's such a sense of romance about it, which I bet you can dispel the idea a little bit.
It's both actually, and it is the book is a love story to the mill.
Mm,
It is my heart place. I found a new home. I built a new home there with my family, and it's the region where my children's father was born. So they have very deep, generational contact there too. Their grandmother's still alive. So I fell in love with it, and we do have swans. So it's on a lake. So it is this very romantic, you're right, beautiful place. But that part of the world has a very dark history too. So the two goes hand in hand, and you cannot escape the history of that place. Czechoslovakia it was part of the Third Reich at some point. Hitler was there for 3 years under the Protectorate. Prague was his jewel that he wanted. There's been a long history of the Czechs and Germans, co-mingling, co-living on that land. And, during the First Republic, it thrived. There was German, Yiddish, Czech, all spoken together. And it was a hotbed of creativity. And then, of course, World War II came and all that ended, sadly. So you have both there. Yeah.
Right. Well, the part that I think I'm probably romanticizing is what it took to renovate the mill, because you do keep a lot of it sounds very integrated into the natural space. And your goal seemed like it was to not disturb that, but you had to create some place that was habitable.
Right. Yes. So it wasn't really planned. That it's not like I said, oh, I'm going to find a place in the rural countryside and renovate it slowly but surely and build an art center in the middle of Central Europe. It just happened, and that's the story I wanted to tell, that anybody can do this. It's not like I had a lot of funding. I didn't. It was just a life, that's all. And I tried to live that life with integrity, and it was a lot of hard work. It still is. My eldest daughter's now running it, and my youngest daughter is there all the time working in the gardens, in the fields. So one can romanticize it. Yes, it's fabulous, and there's beauty surround every single day, but it is a hard life. But we don't get anything if we don't struggle, right? So that's part of it. The harder the struggle, the greater the return. So
Right.
no regrets. Yeah.
Right. And when you say your eldest daughter is running it, it's now an art center. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
place where people live. It's more like, I would say it's an artist retreat.
Yes. We do residencies, which I started in 2004. We started with a summer camp for kids. So our whole focus is on the environment and art. So how does creativity and the environment come together? And so we started with children, then that turned into study abroad programs with university. We've done Erasmus programs in Europe. That's an exchange of university, cross-cultural exchanges. We've had exhibitions. I ran a gallery for 7 years in our little village. So it's all about how rural culture brings not just sustainable economics to the region, but how community is built in rural environments. And I wanted to tell this story as a foreigner and as a woman in a very patriarchal traditional society, how that happened. And again, it wasn't planned, it just happened. So that's why I'm hoping it will give inspiration to other women that maybe in a post-totalitarian environment, it's possible to rebuild.
Right. And that's the truly beautiful part of this book, is how you talk about art as also a practice of sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
And I really would love if you could talk about that a little bit more. Is that
Yeah.
something that you always thought, or has this grown out of living in this rural space? And yeah, how did this become really so important to you?
Um, I don't know how it became important. I think I've always been an artist, but being over there in that particular environment, in that particular history, kind of redefined and synthesized my ideas on that. So I was fortunate enough to, be able to work at a global level too, not just rural. So eventually I was working with the United Nations and working all over the world with other artists who were doing very similar things. So it's not just me or it's not just our region, but it's happening all over. And I think it's a reaction to our to the globalization that's happened in the world. And then I was able to work with a colleague, Natalie Blanc. We wrote a couple books on it. So it's about how the form of art is actually changing. So after modernism and after postmodernism, the process of art has completely changed now, which I think is very liberating and it's radical. So what's happening in these rural environments is a place where creativity can be restored, because without creativity, we don't have a chance. So, artists are problem solvers. So we're not just painting pictures. We are keeping these resources in our bodies and in our hearts for how to transform the world. And so the form that we bring out into the world can be very, very different in whatever place or whatever person it happens to be coming through. But it's actually a very indigenous way of looking at the world and being in the world. So it's a way of creating for future generations, not just for this particular time period. For example, that's one way. It's a way of engaging with creator, or whatever you want to call that thing greater than us as human beings, engaging with the non-human world and being walking equally with that. So it's a lot of those things that's not particular just to Czech Republic or Central Europe or even Europe, but it's I think part of our human existence.
Mm. Do you think everyone should begin to think of themselves as creators in this way? Do you think we can?
I think we can. I don't think there's any shoulds. There's never any shoulds. It's what each person needs and wants, but every person can, definitely. Yeah. And I really, I mean, that's why I started this school, that if we can, you have children, I think, also, right?
Yes, yes.
So I always like to say the children are closest to the earth because they're short, right? They're still small, but they're still integrated into the rhythms of the earth and nature. And, unfortunately, I think our education systems and our social systems take us away from that connection slowly as we become integrated into what we call society.
Mm.
So I think what we've tried to do at ArtMill is to have a little tiny model of how to keep reconnected to that, because that is the source. And that connection to the earth and to nature is really it's the source of life, right? So if we're disconnected from that, as many of us are in the Western world, then what happens to our psyche? I mean, the amount, because I've also taught in the US and California at the universities, the amount of dystopic, of depression, of anxiety is off the charts, as we know. And the statistics tell us that, and in the West in general. So I that idea of sustainable creativity, it's kind of an odd term, and I would change it now. We really don't use the word sustainable so much as regenerative, because we can't take for granted that it's still there.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Well, I'm going to ask you a question, and you can say to me, that is a ridiculously large question. But I,
It
I am wondering if, as we watch what's happening in the US right now, is your mind going back to those first visits to Prague? And are you thinking of ways that artists now can besides resisting, I think it is what you're talking about also is this regenerative creativity, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that this will be resisted, but what comes next?
Yeah.
How do you make people want to go to
Yeah.
that next thing?
That's, ironically, I didn't know it when this book would come out that this would all be happening, but this what we started at ArtMill was right after 1989. So the country, the region, the culture was devastated. There was nothing. People were so poor, and um and without I'll give you an example. Like when my kids were little and I'd take them to the little preschool kindergarten down in our village, and I got to, with all the other mothers, and we'd be waiting there, and it was on a busy, very busy street. And I said, all these trucks, because it's Central Europe, so they were going straight through. It was a kind of truck line in front of the old schoolhouse, which, by the way, my children's grandfather had gone to. So I had this really like a defensive mother mode of this school, and the kids crossing there every day. It was dangerous and the trucks went too fast. So I said to all the mothers at the bus stop, why don't we organize and let's get the mayor to say they can't do this anymore, and we're going to put up some signs, and we're going to really enforce the speed limit, blah blah blah. And all the mothers were very intimidated by that, because they had been raised in a society that taught them, you want to survive, you stay quiet. You want your children to grow up and go to university, you follow the rules, because so much could be taken away. So I think, going back to your question about right now, is that Americans are remembering that the value of our freedoms, that they can never be taken for granted. And so there's creativity happening every day on the streets. It's amazing. The signs, the mariachi bands outside the ice hotels, there's so many beautiful signs of creativity. So I agree with you. I think something's turned the corner. It's not over yet, but I think something has turned the corner, and that rural places especially have the capacity. First of all, they're important because that's where the food's grown. So that's kind of that's a good thing to have in your pocket if you're in charge of the food, right?
Right.
That's how the Czechs did it. They had the meat out in the countryside, and they had the food. So that was you know, kind of a building block afterwards. So I think that I hope, when I wrote the book, I hoped it would be kind of a guidebook for people to just, oh, I could do that. Why not? It's
Right.
not that hard. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, it's a very inspiring book. It definitely
Thank
it
you.
definitely left me feeling hopeful, because it is good to be reminded this is not the first time in history that people have resisted oppression.
Right.
I think that we are at a point right now with climate that is very different.
It's
Um, I am
true.
hoping, would you be willing to read? There's one paragraph that I thought really brought this up nicely.
And what page is it on in your copy?
221.
So, yes, we're at the very end. And I write, our quote, house is on fire, as Greta Thunberg has warned us. Yet the beauty of our planet is still around us in this moment. Small countries like the former Czechoslovakia, enslaved by the Habsburg Empire before winning independence in 1918, also kept some sense of connection to the land. And that is one of the pearls that I hope this book will reveal. To remember the seasons will turn, and to keep our feet in the earth and our heads up to watch the burning golden leaves fall from the cherry trees in autumn. If this is the last generation, then let us live it with dignity and beauty. But I don't think it is. Our creative selves offer hope that solutions will be found and our everyday lives may become simpler, slower, in a newfound rhythm that resonates to light and shadow, not on and off, we can discover a smaller footprint that can possibly bring us again to a creative connection to our planet.
That's beautiful. That's
Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Well,
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I enjoyed every word of this book. And
Oh,
I'm wondering, is there anything that you would like to say that I didn't ask you about in this conversation?
I think you covered it all. I'm looking for it. I'll be in, I'm coming to California in 2 or 3 weeks to do some readings, and I'll be around up and down the coast in LA, and I hope San Francisco too.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, so I'll keep you posted.
Thank you. And before
Yeah.
we leave, can you tell people how they can find out more about you and more about this book, and also maybe more about these um, places you'll be visiting?
So I don't have all the dates completely firmed yet, but between February 15th and March 15th, I think there'll be about 5 readings. One will be at Diesel Bookstore in LA. There'll be one at UCSC, UC Santa Cruz. There will be one down in Newport Beach and another one in San Francisco, but I'll keep you posted on the date. And so people can find me. My name is Barbara Benish, Benish, barbarabenish.com. And the book is put out by New Village Press. You can find on their website. It's distributed by NYU, and I think it's in bookstores in California now. So,
Well, thank you so much. I think anyone who's looking for hope and inspiration right now should pick up this book.
thank you. Thanks so much, Pam.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Thank you so much to Barbara Benish for coming to Art Heals All Wounds to talk about her book, ArtMill, a story of sustainable creativity in Bohemia. If you're looking for a hopeful read about how to resist authoritarianism and how to find your path as an artist, this book is probably for you. I'll put various links on how to find out more about Barbara and her work and where to find the book. Thank you for listening today. I'm not using social media right now, so if you need to get in touch, you can do it through my website, arthealsallwoundspodcast.com. If you share this episode with only one person who you think might be interested in the topic, that will help the show continue to grow. Thanks again. The music you've heard in this podcast was by Ketsa and Lobo Loco and Barbara Higbee.